Matt Cundill is the owner and operator of the Sound Off Media Company. He also hosts 3 shows himself, including his flagship Sound Off podcast. And I appreciated you engaging with our show. We had Linda Solomon Wood on. She's the founder and the publisher of Canada's National Observer last week. She basically she's calling it how it is. Your response to our post about that interview raised a few eyebrows because you took the conversation in a whole different direction.
Well, I think when it comes to C18 and journalism, we all agree that there's a problem. And I agree with Linda. There is an absolute problem with journalism in the country. And essentially what it is there's a lot of traditional advertisers, whether it was a newspaper, whether it was radio, whether it was TV, who are now sending their money to Google and Facebook. But it's not just for news. It's really for everything. I just don't think it's fair to point the finger straight at Google and Facebook as being the true problem of the whole thing. This is whatever is passed here in Bill C-18, and even if they were to conform, this is a very temporary solution. What we're trying to do here is we're trying to replace the $300 some odd million and try to give local journalism a boost. My suggestion is to have a tax, and if you're going to be a company that's going to advertise on Google and Facebook, there should be a levy. Canada is built on this. We did this with steel. We did this with whiskey recently. We've done this with a number of things. So go ahead. Listen, if you want to be an advertiser, you want to advertise on Google, go right ahead. It just you'll be making a 3% contribution to support journalism in Canada.
What was it that you think in particular about how Ottawa handled this, about how the Liberal government, the feds handled this that was so off base? So you didn't have very kind words in your assessment of how they've handled this and put this bill together.
They don't know tech. It seems that every time we get Mark Zuckerberg in front of Congress, every time we had Netflix at one point get in front of the Canadian government at one point, and they don't seem to understand how tech works. Google and Facebook are basically just going to turn off the news. So it's kind of like, oh, we're going to put a tax on lemonade, and you're going to, well, I'm not going to make lemonade anymore. We know where the money's going. The money's going to this one pot, and we know who's going to be getting it. It's a law that really is, we've caught a lot of shrapnel here. Independent podcasters are being threatened with, hey, you know what, we're going to have to turn off your Instagram page, and we're not really going to share it with anybody. And well, I really never asked for this to begin with. I don't want to be a part of it. And yet here we are. We're a part of it.
Not every journalist or news outlet needs or wants help. And some are now paying the price because of Heritage Minister Pablo Rodriguez's mismanagement and ineptitude. You say he'll have questions to answer regardless of the outcome.
Why are you doing this? Who put you up to this exactly? Was it Bell? Was it Rogers? Was it Post Media? Who exactly instructed you that to go and do this? Because I really think that this is a solution that is really done by a few people and done in whispers and a lobby group perhaps. But it's something that really doesn't include it. Did you consult everybody? Well, they say they did, and there was a lot of back and forth between the Senate. I know Senator Paula Simons, sent some stuff back with Bill C-11, but they didn't listen.
What would be your plea or appeal or message to the Canadian public? Like, what role does the public play here, do you think, in, quote, saving journalism in Canada?
I think the public does have a little responsibility, especially we've got a lot of mom and pop shops who are putting their money into Facebook. I mean, they used to support, whether it was like a film festival or something in the neighborhood. I'll use the Edmonton Journal, for example. They used to present a whole lot of things, but then the money began to sort of disappear. And then people are like, hey, you're going to support us this year. Well, you haven't made an ad buy. They'd never really had digital strategies to begin with. They are now trying to own parts of everyone's day. They start, well, we've got a podcast. Oh, look, now there's Wordle. So it's not a crossword puzzle, but it's a part of people's day. And you need to rebuild back into what you once had. Of course, you used to have sections and they all got peeled away and the classifieds went over here. You've got to build that back in a particular way. And it does cost money. And I think the hardest part is the investigative journalism, which is the real crisis point. We're going to get less investigative. It's very expensive to do. And I totally understand it. But maybe it's time. Subscription models. It's 29 cents to read an article in the Winnipeg Free Press. That is tremendously fair.
I don't know what people think the answer is. And there's a lot of angst aimed at journalists right now. Just read the comments when I post about our interview today. We'll get people that are chirping. You say journalism's dying on the vine, and people will say good. And they've got this sort of angst and anger against journalists. But to me, I don't understand how those people would reconcile that accountability factor that journalism has provided, holding politicians and businesses and polluters accountable for many, many years. And I am concerned. If I wasn't concerned about it, we wouldn't be dedicating time on this show to talking about it. You wouldn't care about it. And that's something that I really wrestle with. It's something that really sincerely troubles me. How about you?
I feel for journalists and journalism, and how are we going to get them paid? I'm very uncomfortable with any level of government having a hand in supporting journalism, because, you can draw a line. Oh, they got X amount of dollars. Therefore, can you be critical and bite the hand that feeds you? And I think the government really wants to stay out of that, which is why they would prefer that Google and Facebook support it, from the outside. I think inevitably what happens in the end with C18 is that Google and Facebook are going to be cutting some form of deal, as it were. I think they'd prefer to deal straight with journalists and news organizations. That's kind of what happened in Australia, although it just went to one outlet, which was a little bit odd. They're going to have to give back a little bit in some capacity. The government doesn't want to, be the people to pass out. Listen, Justin Trudeau passed, I think it was $550 million, a few years ago. I can't remember if that went to the CBC or there was a second one for $300 million.
A bunch of people didn't want that, though. The big outlets didn't want it. It was a bad look, that $600 million.
It is definitely a bad look. And by the way, who decides whether, who gets it? Do I have to apply for it? Who's deciding if I'm a news organization? Does Ryan Jesperson count? We already know Rebel News does not count. And who's making that decision? The minute you accept money like that there's going to be some sort of prerequisites about, hey, how did you spend it? What did you do? You put it into your digital. Oh, you didn't hire a reporter to go into investigative journalism like you've been complaining about for the last 3 years. So it can get a little dicey, about how that money arrives and how it's spent. C11, that's the one where we look at the Ryan Jesperson show. And is it going to pop up at the top of my Google feed? Is YouTube going to be promoting it because it's Canadian? Or is there going to be something else that's a little more Canadian that will be promoted in front of it? So that's really, C11 is really more about the promotion and the organization of Canadian, any form of Canadian content, really, and how it's going to be, pushed out to people. Again, an incredibly vague bill. That, does this affect YouTube? Yeah, apparently it does. But what about Spotify? Well, my podcast is on Spotify. Is this for artists or is this for podcasts? So, so I've already lost a little bit of the campfire by sort of explaining that. But C18 is the one that directly deals with news. So news being, the news links that are shared.